Great to see everyone, and thanks for being here. Obviously, a different preseason than we're used to, and I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to the mayor, Robin Tannehill, of course, all the city and county officials, the linesmen, all the first responders and workers and everybody that's had a hand, the volunteers, the hundreds of volunteers that have helped out, through the last few weeks, trying to get us through this, terrible storm. And so I hope, especially you local reporters, the ones that, have lived this, the last few weeks, like all of us, that you got power back on and that you're safe and your family's safe. But also to realize that there's still so many, without power and so many that are still struggling, even at this point, a few weeks out, and, keep those families, in your thoughts and prayers, because we're not done with this yet. Thank you to the Chancellor Boyce, Athletics Director Keith Carter, and so many people, in this great university that's tried to put this university, back together the last few weeks to allow this to happen. Facility-wise, we feel very fortunate. After you kind of open your eyes after a few days and drive around and see Oxford and the surrounding communities. Facility-wise, we, I don't want to say lost the backstop. The backstop, the pole that holds one of the cables got ripped out of the ground. So it'll show you how powerful ice is, that the weight of the ice on the backstop ripped 40-foot pole out of a 6-foot concrete footer. That pole is now back up, and hopefully the netting will start going up later today and tomorrow. This building that you're in was flooded by a leak and then some other things. But overall, I think we made out pretty good and pretty much back to normal. And so as far as the team, the last few weeks, one of the things that I had to remind myself is the coaches and the players are part of this community as well. And so much like you, much like your neighbor, your lives have got disrupted and have all your stories and different things that you've shared with your family and friends. So have our players and coaches. And so they've been with it or through it, just like you. But they've handled it well, and things are back to normal. But I'm very proud, of our guys and how they've handled, the situation, from a personal standpoint, and trying to be the best baseball player that they can, to being a community member and volunteering and doing things in the community to try to help others. And so that's, kind of been cool for me. I've said it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's probably true. When you watch your team go through this, it's the greatest team-building exercise that you would never want to go through. And when I say that you had a little bit of everything, right? You've had adversity, uncomfortable, unpredictable, where you had to rely on teammates. You had teammates that welcomed in other players to their apartments and fed them, let them sleep on their couches and floors, throughout this. But like I said, we're pretty much back to normal facility. We were able to practice here. The last several days inter-squad. The field's in great shape. Brian McNeil and his crew have done a terrific job getting it back in shape, and we're ready to get going. And so first, from the team part of it, another talented roster that our recruiting coordinator Carl Lafferty's put together, along with Mike Clement and Joel Mangrum. It's an older team. And you've heard me say this, older teams usually win in our league. And so when we start to talk about players and we start to talk about older, why not start with Hunter Elliott, who I would assume is the oldest one on our team. He'll start Friday night, for us against Nevada. Saturday we'll start sophomore Cade Townsend, and on Sunday we'll start transfer redshirt sophomore Will Libert. Will be the three starters this weekend. some critical pieces in the pen that have pitched so well for us this fall and early spring returners. Hudson Calhoun and Taylor Ray, will lean on those guys a lot. Guys that certainly could have been one of the three starters that I've mentioned, but felt, opening weekend it was we needed some of that experience and that talent, coming out of the bullpen. Other guys, other returners that I think you'll see this weekend pitch out of the bullpen: Walker Hooks, Landon Waters, Owen Hancock, guys that seem to have taken another step with Coach Mangrum in their progression on the mound. And also I think you'll see, transfers: Owen Kelly, Landon Koenig, Marco Cipolla, and Patrick Colopy. All have pitched well. All will, see the mound more than likely this weekend. And then some high school guys that have really stood out and pitched really well in early fall and spring: Grayson Gibson and Noah Allen. And that's rounding out the pitchers. Returning-wise, depending what lineup you looked at last year and how you consider starters, but we return anywhere from 5 to 6 of the starting 9 last year. And so starting, Friday night behind the plate, Austin Foley will be back there. At third base, Judd Udemark. Shortstop, Braden Randall. But Owen Payne, has played terrific and will play. We'll play some short, we'll play some second, we'll play some third, maybe even play some outfield. At second base, transfer Dom Decker. We'll get the nod at second base. Will Furness at first. Certainly in some of the lineups, and we'll play probably 3 different lineups throughout the weekend. You'll see Colin Reuter at DH or catcher or first base, one of those 3 positions. Center field, Hayden Federico returns. Outfield, Daniel Pasella transfer. Could start in left field and right field. Tristan Becerra. And then some high school guys, or a high school guy that played really well for us, and I certainly think that you're going to see him this weekend, is Cannon Golden, along with a couple guys that you may not know as well. Brett Mosley, who's a redshirt freshman last year, as well as Tate Sermons, who's had a terrific fall for us. So I think those guys will find the field at some point this weekend. And so with that, I'll open it up to your questions.
Mike, obviously saw Dom from the other dugout back in June, but since he got here, just what have you seen from him as an addition to y'all's team?
Just a really good baseball player. Dom is one of those guys that when the weekend's over, like probably last time we played on this field, you realize how good of a baseball player he is. I don't think Dom's going to wow you by his power or by his foot speed or even defensive prowess. But I think at the end of the day, he does everything very, very well, which bodes well in our game. Certainly a guy that I think could bat at the top of the lineup, be a good table setter for some of those bigger guys that we return that can drive them in. But certainly excited. And when I say ball player, I mean that in the biggest compliment. He can do it all. He can steal bases. He can defend. He can hit. He's going to take pitches. He's going to find a way to get on. And he's a coach's son. And so a lot of times you use that comment because he knows how to play the game. You can tell that he's been around the game and taught the right way. And glad he's wearing our uniform this year.
When has Becerra been completely healthy, and what's kind of his progression been like since he's been here?
He it's tough, and with the arm injury, but that didn't really, I don't think, affected him that much, more so than just being new and trying to get your feet on the ground at a new program. Certainly the throwing program was something that with Josh Porter, our trainer, and really sometimes we lean on Joel Mangrum with that to kind of help navigate the throwing program. That's kind of been a work in progress through the fall, but where if you watch some of the inter squad games, if a ball was hit to him, we wouldn't allow him to throw row, just play and catch the ball. But once it got into his hands, kind of call it dead and put the runners where you think they end up. With that being said, he's had a great early spring. And so him and Pasella, swung it really well. And I think they would admit that it probably wasn't the best fall for them statistically, offensively. But they both look really comfortable and look like the guys that we thought they would be, in the transfer portal.
How big was that start for Cade Townsend in the SEC tournament against LSU? And just where have you seen him grow the most in the offseason? Are you comfortable with him being the Saturday guy?
I don't know. It's probably a better question for Cade. Certainly I think from a lot of people, it puts you kind of front and center. He might be one of the last guys to beat, the eventual national champions at that point. I don't know, their record after that, but certainly against a really good baseball team, he pitched about as well as you could pitch in that game. But I think, from a coach's standpoint, you realize what you hoped and realized all along, that, he belongs. He's a guy that could be an ace, and a guy that can beat, arguably anybody on the field. And I think we always thought that of Cade. It's just being more consistent, and he certainly showed that this fall. So I would assume, and that's a lot of assumptions, that that did a lot for his confidence, and knowing that he can do that not only in our league but against arguably the best team in the country.
What does Hook's offseason look like, and what's maybe if you're anticipating any sort of jump there or anything?
Yeah, I think he worked really hard with Coach Mangrum in the offseason. Worked on some velo training, worked on a harder breaking ball, more of a slider, cutter, and picked up both. He threw this past weekend maybe the best he's thrown collectively. I think since maybe some outings last year, and part of that is the growing pains, and part of that is if you're going to get better, sometimes you got to be willing to go through some of those growing pains. And not that he had a bad fall, but I'm sure there's outings that he would have wanted back. But that's part of progress. Part of progress is taking that proverbial one step forward, two step back, and keep trying to inch forward. And it takes some guts to do that, but certainly looks better. And he's a guy that like we thought last year, a guy that you start in the final game of the season, a guy that could start or relieve, could be a left-handed guy in the bullpen, could be a lot of different roles for him. I think going into his sophomore year.
I know he has experience there at his past stop, but Reuter defensively, what do you kind of see there?
I think yes, I think really improved, and I think one of the things that's helped Colin is just the arm and training, and we probably didn't do the best job last year of really putting him on a throwing program and the strengthening program to where consistently the arm felt good more often. If that's probably bad English, but he, we always felt he was a good receiver. He's going to block the balls. Good leader. Great team guy. But this year has played better, in the inter squad games and thrown the ball, certainly much better than he did last year. So I think certainly he's a viable candidate, to get behind the plate. And he's, last year, one of the big reasons that we recruited him was to be, kind of a right-handed hitting force in the lineup, DH, pinch hitter off the bench. And he did that, against left-handed pitching. He's always done well against left-handed pitching. We weren't probably sure all the time how he could handle right-handed pitching. But he probably, extinguished that this fall. His numbers are almost flip-flopped in the sense that he's handled right-handed pitching. His statistics are even a tick better through the whatever it's been, 75 to 100 at bats, in versus right-handers.
Cipolo healthy completely. I know.
Nobody else got any questions besides Chase? Go ahead, Chase. I'm sorry.
Simple as he healthy. He's been banged up at times.
Yeah. Did I not mention those guys? You mentioned it, but I didn't. Yeah, I'm just making sure because I wrote it down and ran through it. And so, yeah, Marco has kind of battled a few things. He's battled some back issues. He's battled some arm issues, and it's one of those where just when we get him back to full speed, he's had to go back a few steps in his throwing program, and so that's kind of slowed things for him. He threw in the first inter-squad game, I think Sunday, that he's thrown since he's been here. And so some of that is that we've slow played it, where we didn't want to rush him and end up having to sit him for too long. And so he's finally healthy. He looks good, felt great after throwing, so we're excited about it. Yeah, I think he's going to be a part of it.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier.
From the beginning, I'm sorry.
And I know this is usually Parrish's question, but
Closer.
Yeah.
Closer. Oh, gosh. Parrish is infamous for that. I was talking to Kyle Campbell about that. Like, who's going to come up with the Parrish Alford question? So Parrish will be proud. I think this weekend, especially the first game or two, you would probably see Landon Koenig or Landon Waters at the end of the game. But I say that that this is as much depth as we've had in the pitching staff in quite some time. As much, and when I say that, not just numbers, but talented guys that we have to figure out some roles. Certainly you got to start somewhere. We picked these three, well-deserved, Elliott, Townsend, and Libert to start. But there's some super talented guys in the pen that I've already mentioned, and any of those guys like Calhoun or Rabe, could turn into be the closer. And I think that's one of the challenges over the last 4 weeks. I know it sounds kind of dumb, to have gone through a fall and this much of a spring and say who are the guys, but it's different when you walk under those lights, and it's different when you step out on a mound in front of 12,000 people. And so over the 4 weeks, you're looking for performers, and so it's one thing to choose somebody to have the ball at one point, to be a starter, to be a reliever, but it's another thing to watch guys. And I don't mean it in a negative way, I almost mean it in a positive way, that it's an opportunity for guys to, especially from a pitching standpoint, I think more so than the other position players, where you can impact a game immediately and start to get on a roll. And a guy that we don't even talk about in this press conference, you can wake up from a month from now and go, wow, that guy is making a huge impact, and this is his role. Closer, starter, first guy in out of the bullpen. So, but I think the two Landons more than likely. But that's not to say that a Calhoun or Rabe couldn't come in with some length and finish a game as well.
You mentioned Cannon as a freshman that's impressed. What did you see out of Luke Romine throughout the fall?
Good offensively. We got to find a position for Luke. He's played some first. We're going to put him a little bit in the outfield, and again with a veteran lineup, sometimes that's tough position player wise. But there's some guys that it's probably going to be the way that Luke gets into the lineup is with the bat. And so he's really had a good weekend this past weekend, and hopefully he'll continue to swing it for us.
Do you want Calhoun or Rabe or somebody to be that dedicated Mason Morris type for his role this year? Is that vision the same way?
I think at the beginning it is, but we'll see how that how that comes to fruition, and not, again, looking at a negative, can they handle it? We're hopeful of that. But, some of the things, and this is not to get too much into the weeds of last year, but we did that at the beginning because we picked the three starters and thought Mason was just as good as any of those guys. But we needed somebody because Hunter was coming off. It's going to be his first start in 2 years. And we knew that fortunate to get 4 or 5 innings out of the first game. We're playing 3 top 25 teams. We're going to need some length, or we start going 1-inning guys in that first game. That's going to put us in a bad position. We need somebody that can come in, and what a role that would be. As the season progressed and he was so good for us, it was hard to take him out of that role. And I think one of the reasons that we ended up where we did as the 10th national seed is because we had that guy coming in after our ace where it just really silenced, for a long time. The probably negative is a lot of those outings he didn't go as long as we would have liked him to. It was really, there wasn't many outings after that he got to 50 plus pitches. His stuff kind of went a different direction, and so he kind of stayed in that role, and we never really pushed him into the starter role because he was so valuable. I'm not sure that's the same with those other guys, Calhoun and Rabe. They've already showed that they can push past 50 pitches. But yes, I think that would be great. But I also think as you pitch them and run them out there more, how they bounce back from some of those outings and some of the shorter outings, does that mean that they could throw more in a, closer role with some length where, hey, you can come in and get 3 outs or you can come in and get, 9 outs? Or do you end up starting on one of the days on a weekend? So there's a lot of different, but I think you're going to see that on Friday night, that one of those guys is going to come in, right behind Elliott.
You brought a really strong class of transfers this year and some new freshmen. How valuable has it been to have a guy like Hunter Elliott, who's been around the program for so long, to help them assimilate to the team?
I think it's super important. There's so much said about the portal and having rosters change. I think we're 19 and 19. We have 38 guys on a roster, and I think we have 19 new guys and 19 returners. And that's really pretty good when I say pretty good, to have 50% of your guys return. There's a lot of teams in our league that don't have 50% of their team, as returners. We didn't last year. I think, last year might have been a year we had 26, new guys, out of 40, something like that. And so I think it's important to have returners like Hunter and others, that have been through the wars, that can help those young players. I say young players, new players, understand what it is to play in our league, what it is to play here at Swayze Field, in front of a great fan base, but a fan base that's got huge expectations, and there's going to be 10, 11, 12,000 people every time you run out on the field. That doesn't happen but a few spots in the country. And so, and then just the general things of being a leader, of, keeping, we as coaches, you can try to do all you can to prepare them, but sometimes it's a lot easier when it's player-led. And that you have players, in the locker room and on the bus and, and everywhere else that can help those guys. I think that, most of the time moves the needle more than something that I say. That when it comes from Hunter or comes from a Judd Utermark, I think, in a lot of ways it holds a lot more weight.
You feel about your outfield defense right now?
I'll let you know at the end of the weekend. I will say we've gotten a lot better, and some of that is because of some new guys out there. But I also, feel comfortable that, we talk a lot about Pacella and Becerra. Fed's gotten a lot better. Remember, Fed hasn't even played a season out there, and he's gotten a lot better. But Pacella and Becerra, I think, are better outfielders than they probably played in the fall, and we've seen that in this few weeks in the spring. But two of the younger guys, Golden and Mosley, are two of our best defenders, and so I think that's going to be a way to get them onto the field, even if it's not a start. Those guys will be able to come in and play some corner outfield or even in center field.
What can this year's team learn from last year's?
Wow. I don't know. That's a tough one. I think every team's different, and I'm going to struggle to answer this question. Maybe I'll talk my way into an answer. I don't know if I've really thought about that as far as that team, but I do believe that last year's team was a really good team. And what I mean by that is I think they cared for one another, they respected one another, and it's a long season. And when you have that type of teamsmanship, when you have that type of character on your team, when you have that type of leadership, when the tough times come, it's easier to navigate through those times. And so it's hard to find a team that has a ton of success in any sport, that at the end of the year they don't talk about their teammates. They don't talk about what great leadership they have. Those teams that have that chemistry, culture, a lot of different words you want to call it, but those teams that like each other, like being with one another, seem to navigate the tough times a lot better.
What are your thoughts on the schedule this year? Obviously, SEC baseball is always tough, but it's quite the column this year.
Yeah, I read somewhere the last few days that we have a really tough SEC schedule. I think every year it's really tough. Our league is hard, and you can split it up and pull out numbers, and they have a lot more numbers now than they ever have. But it's hard. Our league's hard, and be careful what you wish for. A lot of people want to be in the SEC. Be careful what you wish for. But it's also, I think, an honor, a pleasure, to be in that war every weekend, to play in a league where it matters, and not just at your place, but wherever you go, that they're invested and they care about college baseball, and to play against the best teams, and, in the biggest stadiums and nicest stadiums in the country. It's pretty cool. So I know our guys are excited about the opportunity. Anything else?
Well, I got you. Some
All right.
level of conversation about officially moving the season back first week of March. Where do you fall on that?
Is that, I saw something like that. It usually gets traction every so many
I mean, it looks
years.
like Kendall was trial ballooning it. Looks like it's.
Kendall was behind it?
Well, and Bakich is pushing it the hardest. It looked like Kendall was doing a little trial balloon to gauge.
I may be old school. Some would certainly, I've been around a long time. It's been something that's talked about for a long, long time. It might sound more reasonable now because there's so many online courses and those types of things. We play so much of our season after school anyway. I don't know if I really want to play too much. And there's a lot of different things that I'm sure I'm not in that. I haven't read any of the proposals or anything like that. I know also there's some TV issues, with ESPN and Wimbledon and some things that people don't think about that, be careful. Then all of a sudden your championships and, not on television anymore. With that being said, I don't know if I would be a huge proponent of that, Yeah, we just had an ice storm, but, it's going to be 60 degrees, on Friday. The next weekend, it's going to be in the 70s. And so I get it. There's places in this country where it won't be, but here it will be. But I'm sure there's places in the country where, they're playing football in the snow in November, or, we're putting on our helmets in football on August 31st, and it's 105, on the football field. So weather's always going to play a little bit of a role in it. I think it was I will say, I think it'll play a huge impact. I hope, especially with the arm injuries, the ramp-up time. Nobody's asked about that. Normally we have 3 weekends. We started this year like January 12th. Thank God for that. Imagine what we just went through if we didn't have that, because that would have been maybe the first weekend of inter-squads, I think, that storm hit. And then you start to look up and you say, Hunter and Cade and Libert and all the pitchers, I mean, they missed their first weekend of, inter-squads, but those guys were in position that we actually, it was their second inter-squad, I think, and they actually threw before that, which, last year that wouldn't have happened. So that was probably too long of an answer and not enough information, but I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not going to jump on a soapbox. We'll play when they tell us to play. Anything else? Thank you.